Welcome to the Secular Bible Study. I'm the Amateur Exegete. Who wrote the Gospel according to Mark? This may seem like a silly question. After all, it is called the Gospel according to Mark. Why would it be named that if he had not written it? Well, things aren't as cut and dry as that. The truth of the matter is that the Gospel we call Mark was anonymously written. This is true of all of the Gospels. Nothing within the book tells us who wrote it. In fact, the name Mark doesn't even appear in the Gospel of Mark. So where do people get the idea that someone named Mark wrote it? Well, for that, we can thank one man, Papias. Papias was a 2nd century bishop who wrote a 5-volume work entitled An Exposition of the Sayings of the Lord. Unfortunately, that work is lost to history, and we can only find excerpts of it in the works of the 2nd century bishop Irenaeus and the 3rd century bishop and historian Eusebius. It is in Eusebius that we find the following quote.
This also the presbyter said, Mark, having become the interpreter of Peter, wrote down accurately, though not in order, whatsoever he remembered of the things said or done by Christ. For he neither heard the Lord nor followed him. But afterward, as I said, he followed Peter, who adapted his teaching to the needs of his hearers, but with no intention of giving a connected account of the Lord's discourses, so that Mark committed no error, while he thus wrote some things as he remembered them. For he was careful of one thing, not to omit any of the things which he had heard, and not to state any of them falsely.
So Papias says that 1. Mark received his information from Peter, 2. Mark was not an eyewitness to Jesus, and 3. The gospel was not written in order, but followed after Peter's style of accommodating for his audience. When you look at the New Testament documents, you don't get the sense that Mark and Peter spent much time together. In fact, the book of Acts makes it abundantly clear that Mark was more associated with Paul and Barnabas than any other New Testament figure. The only exception to this is 1 Peter, where we read the following.
Your sister church in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark. 1 Peter 5:13.
But this doesn't establish the relationship between Peter and Mark that Papias implies, because for one, we aren't sure who this Mark is, though commentators typically identify him with the Mark of the book of Acts. For another, the first epistle of Peter wasn't written by Peter, and was likely composed in the late 1st century, well after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE. We can also observe that Papias is wrong on other issues. For example, he claims that Matthew's Gospel was originally written in Hebrew, but this is highly unlikely. For one, our earliest versions of Matthew are all in Greek, and Matthew shows signs of clear borrowing from Mark and even improving upon Mark's Greek, a Greek text. So Papias isn't all that trustworthy on the authorship or nature of the Gospels, and it is upon his testimony that our tradition of Markan authorship rests. So if he's wrong, what does that mean? Well, it means that we are back to square one. It means that we have to confess that we simply don't know who wrote the Gospel of Mark. And there is no shame in saying, I don't know. This is the Amateur Exegete, signing off.